U.S. History, Chapter 2, Section 4, the Women's Movement. What steps did American women take to advance their rights in the mid-1800s? The things you should be able to do by the end of the chapter in this section is identify limits that American women faced in the early 1800s, how women began playing an increasing role in political and economic life and the impact that that's going to have, and the development of the women's rights movement. So when we look for women and what it is that they're kind of facing, they really are extremely limited. Uh, Most states bar them from owning any kind of property. Uh, they're not allowed to run for office. They can't vote. The vast majority of women aren't getting anything beyond a grade school education. Um, a few do go on to high school, and if you graduate from high school, you could become a teacher yourself. And then a very few are going to go on to college or universities, and that will change and pick up a little bit here later on in the later 1800s. When you look at women, one area, or I guess I'm going to talk about a couple areas, but one key area where their opportunities are opening up is because of the Second Great Awakening. That is encouraging all Americans to get out there and do the hard work of making the country better. And so that is going to encourage women to take a more active role. In addition to that, the country had always promoted this idea of Republican motherhood, that it's the duty of mothers to be educated, to know what's going on in the country, so that way they can raise their sons to become good participants in democracy. It's their duty to raise their daughters to understand the principles of the American experiment and the Constitution, so that one day when they become mothers, they can pass that knowledge on to their sons. And so those things are kind of fostering women to make sure that they're active and involved and keeping up to date on things. And then the abolition movement, when that starts, women really see that as kind of the doorway to giving them a chance to become more politically active and perhaps gaining all the rights of citizenship. Another factor that's going on here is the United States is beginning to industrialize. And as these new factories are being built, a lot of times it's women that get the opportunity to work in these factories because men already have jobs and they don't need another job. And so these new, especially textile mills, are bringing in young girls who then can go off to work. They gain some independence. They start to accumulate some money that is helping them financially support their families, but that it's giving them their independence to be able to kind of think and learn and expand. So that's kind of the underlying. Then there's a couple of other things that are going on that are really going to kind of speed up this process. One is as Americans become wealthier, middle class, and I guess more upper middle class and wealthy women begin to hire house workers so they don't have to do all the daily work and the chores and the cleaning. And that frees them up to become more involved in reform movements, particularly in abolition. And so you start to see these early women who are involved in the abolition movement. Angela Grimke, actually, and she and her sister, the Grimke sisters, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They are working and pushing hard for the abolition of slaves. They go to London expecting to be able to speak, Mott and Stanton do, in London, and they're shut out. And they realize that there's something else going on here, that it isn't enough to work for African American rights. They need to also work for women's rights. So they agree to meet in Seneca Falls. This is Mott and Stanton that are really kind of organizing this. And you get them creating the Declaration of Sentiments that looks an awful lot like the Declaration of Independence. And this is really going to mark the start of the women's rights movement and the push for suffrage, the right to vote. They realize that if they don't get the right to vote, they really aren't going to be able to change the political, economic, or social system. They do get some gains, for example, the Married Women's Property Act, where it's going to allow women to be able to gain property and hold on to property. And it seems like a small step, but it's a step in the right direction.